Right, I want to talk about two things that have heavily bothered me over the past week. Yes, I'm talking about the idea that males and or white people have some sort of privilege in life because they are these things. The idea that someone has privilege based on arbitrary factors that they have no control over is absurd to me. In regards to gender, I can understand why some people would think that it's a valid thing that makes you different innately. But in regards to race, a concept that is inherently flawed and has no real credibility in today's society, despite SJWs using it as one of their main vocal points, I can't understand why people are so dumb when it comes to discussing privilege in relation to it. I was at work the other day. I'm on set talking to some of the people I met and befriended on the job, and somehow the topic went on to talking about the young lead child actor that was in the production who I formed a friendship with. Now the assistant director called him over to tell me about the chase scene for the next shot and information on what to do, what to say, when to say it, blah 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 blah. And then one of the elderly extras I was working with said to me, "He looks up to you, you know. I can tell by the way he looks at you, son." And one of the younger extras replied, "I wonder why. Probably because there's hardly any black talent in the industry." Now I gave her the look of, this bitch. But I held my tongue, one, because it was probably intended as a compliment towards me, and two, because the assistant director just shouted rolling, which means that the camera is obviously rolling, and they're about to shoot, and then we need to wait for the call for action. Now fast forward about 15 minutes, the crew are moving the camera equipment to the next area for the next shot in the chase scene, and as I said goodbye to my new friend, whatever the boy was called, as he went back to the green room, I walked back to the extras I was with earlier, and then there was a discussion going on about how white privilege is such a big issue in the filming industry. Now, because I do not fall under the arbitrary demographic called white, I didn't instantly jump onto them as some people instinctively do. But as I let them ramble about how white the crew is and how their skin colour is what gives them privilege over other factors, I had to interject into that horseshit debate. I'm sorry, where's the white privilege for some of the homeless people scattered around London? They all turned to look at me as if I was crazy. I could sense the Uncle Tom labels coming into their minds, but I carried on because I don't believe in that primitive crap. I'm too rational for that. When you relegate someone down to race or skin colour, I carried on, you're dismissing all the other features of that person. What if that white person you're racially profiling is a decent person? What if they have defended someone who was actually facing racism, actual racism, in the past? What if their loved one isn't white? And believe it or not, some of them started to change their faces, and even started to nod in agreement, albeit as if it was a bit taboo to think like this. I turned to the first out of the people who silently acknowledged my words, a British-born girl with Nigerian parents. Do you want to be judged by how much melanin you have, or do you want to be judged by your merit, what you can do for the world, what your talents are, how good of a person you are? And obviously, she said the obvious option. She chose the latter. The people who still couldn't understand my point just agree to disagree, making me realise that a lot of these people don't actually think about the other side of things. They just continue to only surround themselves with people who share their own narrow-minded perspective on things. It's fascinating, actually, to imagine how big their echo chambers must be, yet terrifying at the same time. After that conversation, I realised that there is still a them versus us mentality going on in society today. You can use the whole political scale as an example, the left versus the right. When I tell people that I'm neither left or right, the majority of them scratch their heads in confusion, and I've spoken to many people who have a similar mindset who receive the same response. I personally believe that there are good parts to both political spectrums that we can use to form a better world, but that's a topic for another video, folks. In regards to racial privilege, people need to understand that your melanin count or skin colour or whatever you want to call it doesn't make you more powerful socially. Well, it kind of does nowadays, but it shouldn't. I say this because the concept of race that we use mostly as a form of demographic is actually flawed, it's incorrect. It's amazing how people forget that we're all humans that fall under the subspecies Homo sapien. We're all homos. And your gender, sexuality, mindset, or skin colour isn't going to change that. All skin colour means is that your most recent ancestors were born a certain distance from the equator, and because of this retain a certain amount of vitamin D from the sun. That is all. I can't fathom how people don't know that this concept of race only really grew up in popularity in recent history. It was one of the many divisive methods used by the business owners who made their millions to divide and rule over the population they controlled. They were like the predecessors to the captains of the industry. Keep the blacks hating the whites and the whites hating the blacks so that they forget about the important problems that are happening in the world. Even blokes from 700 years ago were able to figure this shit out. There used to be this idea that humans were descendants of the biblical Noah's 3 sons. Shem, who was like the descendant of the Asians, Japheth, the descendant of the Europeans, and Ham, I think his name was, who was the African predecessor. But if you look up Ibn Khaldun, a 14th century sociologist, you learn how even he, back then, was able to explain that the darker skin in Africa was due to the hot climate. It's funny, a 700-year-old Islamic sociologist has more sense than not only medieval Christians and Jews back then, but half of today's population. Now, before I go off on another tangent, I want to tell you what happened in the next conversation to shed a bit more light on the gender part of this video. The group I was with earlier eventually started to congregate next to the step before we were called into the next shot. So we talked about some other things, random things, non-political things, non-controversial things. It was alright, a lot of banter. But they started talking about feminism, and I happily joined into this discussion. One of them asked me what my views on feminism were, and I responded, I am not a feminist, or leftist for that matter, and I don't see the ideologies around that area as the best options today. One of the guys looked at me with that concerned, ooh boy face before one of the girls, I think it was a Nigerian one, she asked, oh, so you're one of those alt-right feminists then? I said, no, I don't align with the right either. Groups like MGTOW, the men's rights activists, whatever, make similar mistakes in my eyes. Miss Nigeria looked intrigued, the guy and the others looked confused. So you're not for equality? You know that's what feminism fights for, right? One of the other girls said. And I responded with, if modern feminists were still fighting for true equality, they wouldn't call themselves feminists, they'd call themselves egalitarian. They'd stop holding on to the problems that women are going through, and instead focus on the problems that all people are going through. Yet again, their faces were a mix of intrigued and confused. The girl who started the last debate eventually came down from the supporting artiste area where she needed to quote-unquote meditate after the heat discussion we had. Now, I believe it was code word for I've never had someone directly challenge my words before and have the more logical and convincing argument, so I needed to calm myself down so that I don't get triggered. Now, I'd like to believe that she was thinking about what I said, and once she joined the conversation, it seemed like she did. Until she didn't. Eventually, she stated that she didn't want to talk about that kind of stuff anymore before going away to chat with some of the other extras. One of the people in our circle of discussion eventually said, I can see why she doesn't want to have these intense discussions with you. You're a bit overbearing with your masculinity. Woo! Now I jumped onto that instantly. How so? Because I put across a strong argument? She replied, if you were quite forceful the way that you were talking, whilst you were only speaking your mind, she can't speak in such a way. That's what male privilege is. And I responded with something along the lines of, this idea you have that being a man gives me some sort of power above you because you're a woman is almost the same as the race discussion we just had. She cut me off to interject, but how would you know? As a man, you wouldn't understand. I know that racially your points are more valid, but in regards to being a man, there are certain privileges that you have to understand. The girl with the Nigerian parents then said she has a point. A guy projecting his voice in a commanding way like yourself is seen as strong. If one of us did it, it would be seen as us being a bitchy rude girl. I rebutted with, if I'm coming across as commanding and overbearing, it's because I'm commanding and overbearing, not because I have a dick. Being commanding and overbearing? How you interpret things is all subjective. My words aren't doing anything physically to you. I'm not responsible for how you take that. So that's on you as an individual, mate. And by your logic, you guys are the ones being overbearing towards me, as I'm a lone person with several others coming onto me whilst trying to play the victim card. Or aren't men allowed to be victims? You can't generalize, and the fucking bitch interjected again. And I made sure she realized it with the way I looked at her. She then tried to apologize and say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go on and finish your point. I'm the overbearing one, right? I responded after a brief pause. It's fine. You've already interrupted and ruined my momentum. She reluctantly carried on, and I can't be able to describe the essay these girls gave me, but it all amounted to, men have things easier. Women are oppressed in society through subtle ways. Masculinity is oppressive and gives you privilege, etc., 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 the normal horseshit. I paused and asked, are you finished? They said, yeah. And I said, now listen to what I have to say. You do not have the same mindset, the same personality, biology, spirit, whatever, as any other man or woman on this planet because you are one of these random demographics. The same goes for your melanin count. Just because your skin is the same as others or similar as others doesn't mean that you have the same mindset, problems or privilege, as you like to point out. I am living proof of this. We are not some sort of hive mind. It all comes down to identity politics in the end. Stop thinking that people have certain things that they go through based on these random boxes that they tick. That itself is oppressive, and this bitch tried to interrupt me yet again. I said, remember the privilege you said I had? Yes, you're the one interrupting me and talking over me. I'm sorry, I just wanted to respond. Well, let me finish, hun. The same as I did for you. We all believe in equality, do we not? We are all meant to be on the same team then. But you're doing it the wrong way. Treat people as individuals and not based on random demographics that they have no control over. Now, she kept coming at me with responses that inevitably led to nothing, and she yet again agreed to disagree like the other girl. Not surprising to say the least, and our little discussion group came to an end. It seems like people don't want to figure out the right thing, they just want to be right. It's very childish, isn't it? Later on, near the end of the workday, Lady Nigeria and I spoke about the large amount of philosophizing we did that day. I got the vibe that she indeed had a similar outlook to mine, but was testing the confidence in my words because, well, let's face it, she didn't exactly have the confidence in hers. I understood it wasn't exactly the popular opinion to have, but I defended it anyway, and I guess she grew to respect that. She admitted the conflict within herself during the discussions because despite herself being part of the black and female demographics, her boyfriend was part of the white and male demographics. She must have realised in her mind that the stereotype for white males and her partner's actual self weren't really aligning very well, leading to her figuring out that maybe not all blokes with certain melanin counts are destined to act a certain way. Now, what I find funny is that that girl that kept interrupting me earlier was in the same boat. Dark-skinned girl with a pale-skinned guy. It kind of begs the question, what kind of person is the boyfriend? But that's none of my business, is it? Now, before I end this video, I want to say something that might or might not resonate with you. Just hear me out. Just because you are a female doesn't mean that you have to have feminine traits. In fact, some of the most masculine people I know are women. Vice versa for males. Not all men have to be this dominant alpha with stereotypically masculine traits. Now, don't get me wrong, the way I see it, there are only two true differences between our species on a heavily physical level, and that is gender, male and female, XX and XY. But they are two sides to the same coin. All it is a couple of different hormones, a few different body parts, and some blood once a month. I understand that difference, but that doesn't solely make you different from someone. Everything about you makes you different. We are complex individuals that are different from each other on such a scale. There's nearly 8 billion of us. Hell, I use my favourite animated show as an example, Star Wars The Clone Wars. All the featured clone troopers have their own personality. The flexible Rex was the complete opposite to the precise Cody. Wolf was more skeptical, Boyle was hardcore, but Waxer was more kind and considerate. Gregor, as seen in Rebels, was a bit messed up in the head. Heavy wanted to find his own way. Tup just wanted to follow orders. Fives was a truth seeker, and Echo was by the books, and so on. They were all unique despite being clones from the same template. I know it's not a real life example, but it's a perfect analogy to work with in regards to the context of my point. We are all the same species, subspecies, race, whatever you want to bloody call it. But we are all unique individuals that should be treated as such. And just because someone's ancestors may have done some messed up shit, doesn't mean that you should hold their descendants responsible. Well, think about this before we end. Let's say a random man tracked down, raped a woman brutally, and then fled. Now DNA allowed the police to track him down, and the police had his house surrounded, no way for him to get out, only life in prison, so he kills himself to avoid that. Would you then punish the child when he or she is born as justice for the mother? I'll leave you with that extreme example of what I'm saying. Catch you in the next one.